Cherokee and Navajo. Two histories people constantly mix up. Confusing the Cherokee and the Navajo is an oversight that borders on historical malpractice. It is as utterly absurd as claiming Portugal and Finland are the exact same country simply because they both exist in Europe. Yet, in the American pop culture consciousness, the two largest native nations are constantly, carelessly blended into one generic Wild West stereotype. The reality is that they are two fundamentally separate worlds. Divided by thousands of miles of symbolic and literal continent, the Cherokee and the Navajo possess histories, geographies, and social architectures that share almost zero common ground. To understand just how different they are, we must first look at the earth that forged them. To truly grasp the magnitude of their divergence, one must first examine the radically different soils that birthed them. The Cherokee emerged from the lush, forgiving embrace of the American Southeast. Specifically, the Appalachian regions spanning modern-day North Carolina, Georgia, and Tennessee. This was a realm of unparalleled environmental abundance, defined by predictable rainfall, winding river systems, and deeply fertile earth. Such geographical wealth allowed the Cherokee to construct a society rooted in permanence. They were highly sophisticated agriculturalists who mastered the Three Sisters technique, growing corn, beans, and squash in a brilliant, symbiotic polyculture that maximized crop yields without draining the soil's nutrients. Their world was one of enduring log and clay homes and intricate political councils. Yet, from a dark historical perspective, this very stability and agricultural brilliance became their ultimate curse. They had cultivated a paradise so perfectly manicured that it inevitably attracted the insatiable, destructive greed of white frontiersmen. Thousands of miles to the west, the Navajo, who call themselves the Diné, meaning the people, were forged in a starkly contrasting reality. They navigated the unforgiving expanse of the American Southwest, carving their existence out of the Colorado Plateau, a brutal but breathtaking labyrinth of arid plains, towering mesas, and blood-red canyons. This was a hostile landscape that mercilessly punished stagnation and demanded constant, grueling adaptation. However, the Navajo did not merely survive this harsh terrain. They wove it into the very architecture of their consciousness. Their traditional earthen wood dwelling, the hogan, is a masterpiece of cosmological design, built with its doorway perpetually facing east to greet the rising sun. Every element of Navajo existence is anchored in a concept called hozo. This is a profound philosophical and spiritual belief system, centered on absolute harmony and balance between the individual, the community, the natural world, and the cosmos. In this deeply connected worldview, human vulnerability is tied directly to the environment. When someone falls ill, it is not merely viewed as a simple physical disease. Instead, it is seen as a dangerous rupture in this universal harmony. It is a spiritual and environmental misalignment that requires complex rituals and ancient songs to heal. The Navajo flourished in one of the continent's most desolate terrains, not by attempting to conquer nature, but by mastering a deep understanding of perfect balance. It was a psychological resilience that would soon be brutally tested as the encroaching military nightmares of Western expansion began to close in. Despite the vast physical and philosophical distances between them, the Cherokee and the Navajo shared a rare and powerful social foundation. Both societies operated strictly through matrilineal clans. In these cultures, a person's identity, bloodline, and heritage were passed down exclusively through the mother. This matriarchal spine gave women significant influence and power within the community. It was a social structure that completely baffled the patriarchal European colonizers, who arrived with a rigid obsession with male dominance. This shared trait proves that both nations were far from the chaotic, primitive bands depicted in Western myths. They were highly organized societies, built on foundations of deep respect for the feminine life force. For the Cherokee, their economic backbone was rooted in the fertile soil of the Southeast. They were master agriculturalists. By perfecting the Three Sisters farming technique, planting corn, beans, and squash together, they created a system that yielded massive harvests without destroying the earth. This agricultural wealth allowed them to build formidable, permanent towns. But their sophistication did not stop at farming. The Cherokee constructed a revolutionary political state. They operated under a council-based government, led by an elected principal chief. They established a codified legal system, built official courts, and astonishingly, they drafted and ratified a written constitution before many American states had even finalized their own. They played the game of Western civilization perfectly. Yet, as history would tragically reveal, their brilliant adaptation was not a shield. It was a target. Their highly organized, thriving state only made their fertile lands more irresistible to the greedy eyes of the expanding American empire. Meanwhile, the Navajo built an entirely different kind of empire out of the harsh southwestern dust. Their economy was not driven by massive crop yields, but by breathtaking craftsmanship. They transformed the raw materials of their unforgiving environment into highly prized art. They became world-renowned for weaving vibrant, geometrically complex rugs and for forging heavy, beautiful jewelry out of silver and bright blue turquoise. Today, this economic resilience continues. The Navajo boldly manage their own tourism, taking full control of sacred and majestic landscapes like Monument Valley and Antelope Canyon. They do not merely live on the land, they govern it with unmatched authority. The Navajo Nation operates under a massive tribal council system, led by an elected president and vice president. They are the largest federally recognized tribe in the United States. Their complex government agencies manage a sovereign territory that is larger than the entire region of New England. They are not a fading relic of the past. They are a sprawling, modern political giant, standing firm on the very soil the American military once tried to banish them from. Moving beyond their lands and politics, we must look at the very voices of these nations. Language is often the most visible surface of a deeper identity. But for the Cherokee and the Navajo, language was an intellectual fortress. The Navajo language belongs to the Na-Dene family. This connects them not to the tribes of the American East, but to the ancient, frozen migrations of northwestern Canada and Alaska. It is a highly tonal language. It is incredibly dense and complex. Every single word carries heavy layers of information about movement, direction, and deep intention. In fact, it was so deeply complex that the American military later used it as an unbreakable code during the Second World War. The famous Navajo code talkers used their mother tongue to confuse and defeat the Japanese Empire. It was a living, breathing cipher that no enemy could ever crack. The Cherokee language, however, belongs to the Iroquoian family, and it holds one of the most brilliant intellectual achievements in human history. A man named Sequoyah, who had never learned to read any other language, spent 12 agonizing years creating a complete writing system entirely from scratch. By the year 1821, he introduced an alphabet of 86 distinct syllables. The result was an absolute cultural explosion. Within a few short years, the literacy rate among the Cherokee was actually higher than that of the white American settlers living right next door. By 1828, They were publishing the very first bilingual newspaper in America, called the Cherokee Phoenix. This was not a primitive tribe. It was a highly educated society, operating in parallel to the world that was actively trying to erase it. History is rarely fair, but the American West was uniquely cruel. The darkest paradox of this era is the fate of the Cherokee. They were not destroyed because they were savage or backward. They were completely crushed because they were entirely too civilized. Their brilliant adaptation to Western politics and economics made their fertile lands in Georgia too valuable to ignore. Some wealthy Cherokee farmers even owned massive plantations, fully adopting the Southern American way of life. But when gold was discovered on their territory, their civilization suddenly became a fatal threat. In the year 1830, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act. He blatantly ignored a ruling by the United States Supreme Court that legally protected the Cherokee. Instead, he unleashed the military to steal their land. This sparked the infamous Trail of Tears. It was a brutal death march during a freezing winter that wiped out thousands of Cherokee people. They played by the white man's rules perfectly, and their reward was an absolute massacre. Decades later, the Navajo would face their own military nightmare. But they were not tricked by dirty politics. They were crushed by raw, brute force. In the year 1864, the American Army forced around 10,000 Navajo people to march over 300 miles across the desert. This bloody journey is known as the Long Walk, but the horror did not stop on the trail. Their destination was Bosque Redondo in New Mexico. We must call this place what it truly was. It was an early concentration camp. The land was dead and totally unfit for farming. The water supply was heavily poisoned. Hundreds of Navajo people died of starvation and disease in the very first months of their arrival. Yet, in a rare twist of Western history, the Navajo refused to break. After 4 years of unbearable suffering, they forced the American government to admit its catastrophic failure. In 1868, they successfully signed a historic treaty and returned to their ancestral homeland. It was a rare, powerful victory, but the scars of that dark era would continue to bleed for generations to come. Let us shatter the comfortable, Hollywood myth of the backward, primitive native. The truth is far more uncomfortable. By the 1830s, the Cherokee had successfully Americanized. They had mastered the brutal economic game of the South so completely that some wealthy Cherokee planters actually owned massive plantations. They bought enslaved black people and even hired white indentured servants. They were the ultimate proof that an indigenous nation could perfectly integrate into European society. But this incredible adaptation did not save them. In the eyes of the government, it did not matter how civilized they became. They were still merely Indians who occupied valuable space, and they simply needed to be erased. The fatal blow to the Cherokee Nation was not a clash of cultures. It was the purest form of greed. When massive gold deposits were discovered on their sovereign land in northern Georgia, that territory immediately became the most coveted prize in the expanding American empire. To seize this wealth, the American government orchestrated the greatest legal land heist in history. They did not win a fair war. They engineered a fake treaty. This fraudulent document was signed in secret by a tiny, powerless fraction of the Cherokee population, men who had absolutely no authority to represent their entire nation. The sheer audacity of this lie was staggering. Historians have compared it to a minor fascist politician like Oswald Mosley secretly traveling to Germany and signing a treaty to hand over the entire nation of Britain to the Nazis. Everyone knew the treaty was a total sham. Yet, the American government coldly used it as legal cover. They deployed armed military forces to forcibly herd over 10,000 Cherokee people onto a freezing, miserable path to death. an atrocity forever known as the Trail of Tears. While the Cherokee were destroyed by political deceit, the Navajo were crushed by raw, terrifying military force. For the Navajo people, the darkness of the West wore the blue uniform of the American Army. Under the ruthless command of General James Carleton, the military unleashed an absolute nightmare. In 1864, they forced the Navajo to endure the Long Walk, a brutal march across 300 miles of punishing desert. But the true horror of this dark history does not end on the bloody trail. We must look closely at their final destination. The Navajo were not marched to a new settlement. They were herded into Bosque Redondo in New Mexico, which was, in every practical sense, an early concentration camp. It was quite literally hell on earth. The soil was entirely dead, completely unfit for planting even the hardiest crops. Worse still, the limited water supply was heavily contaminated and toxic. Confined to this desolate wasteland, the Navajo were intentionally starved and broken. Hundreds of people withered away, dying of disease, malnutrition, and the absolute cruelty of their captors in the very first months of their imprisonment. It was a systematic attempt to grind a proud, ancient civilization into dust. But the death sentence of the American West did not end with stolen land and poisoned water. When the frontier was fully conquered, and there was simply no more territory left to push the indigenous people onto, the government pivoted to a much darker, psychological strategy. They aimed their knives directly at the souls of the children. The Federal Indian Boarding School system was born. This was not a network of education. It was a highly refined machine of cultural genocide. The unofficial motto of this system was created by its founder, Richard Henry Pratt, and it remains one of the most chilling sentences in American history. Kill the Indian, save the man. In the eyes of the government, indigenous identity was no longer just a physical obstacle. It was treated as a dangerous sickness, a disease that had to be aggressively cured through relentless pedagogical violence. We must picture the agonizing reality of this machine. Cherokee children were physically kidnapped and torn from the hills of Oklahoma. Navajo children were dragged far away from their sacred red canyons. They were locked inside isolated, distant institutions. Inside these cold walls, they were brutally beaten and punished for simply speaking the native languages of their mothers. This was the ultimate crime of the Wild West. It did not just kill bodies, it created generations of ghosts. The boarding schools acted as identity-crushing machines. These children grew up with deeply fractured souls, trapped in a suffocating void. They were never truly accepted by the white society that forced them to assimilate, yet they were entirely stripped of their original heritage. They returned to their reservations as strangers, completely lacking the vocabulary to name the world the way their grandparents had. They were wandering phantoms, suspended permanently between two worlds, with full access to neither. To conclude this dark history, we must understand that the modern confusion between the Cherokee and the Navajo is not merely an innocent mistake made by the public. It is the lasting, successful symptom of a massive brainwashing machine. It is the result of a system that intentionally lumped all Native people into one invisible, generic mass, simply to make it easier to hide its own monumental crimes. The Wild West was never built on the shining glory of civilization. It was paved with a blinding lust for gold, fraudulent treaties, and deeply abusive classrooms. Let us be absolutely clear. The Cherokee and the Navajo are not the same. To group them together is a cruel denial of their distinct, towering greatness. They are two entirely independent worlds, carrying their own specific wounds, their own majestic geographies, and their own beautiful languages. And despite everything the American Empire did to erase them, they continue to fiercely exist today. If you want to keep uncovering the chilling, hidden truths of the past, make sure to subscribe to Wild West Dark History. Until next time, remember that the darkest shadows are often hiding in plain sight,